You want her or not, Cowboy? Edna's voice, sharp enough to cut bone, echoed in the livestock yard. Laya's knees trembled, 7 months gone, and feeling every ounce of her shame. Traded for a cow, just to be rid of her. The big man, Cullen, just stared. Didn't even blink. He thinks he's getting a bargain. Another mouth to feed. A warm body for a cold shack. What he doesn't know. Leia carries a quiet strength, a compassion buried under layers of hurt. A single act of kindness and everything will change. They all think she's nothing. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. You want her or not, Cowboy? Edna's voice, sharp enough to cut bone, echoed in the livestock yard. Laya's knees trembled, 7 months gone and feeling every ounce of her shame. Traded for a cow, just to be rid of her. The big man, Cullen, just stared. Didn't even blink. He thinks he's getting a bargain. Another mouth to feed. A warm body for a cold shack. What he doesn't know? Laya carries a quiet strength, a compassion buried under layers of hurt. A single act of kindness and everything will change. They all think she's nothing. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. The Wyoming wind, an autumn blade in 1887, whipped Laya's faded cotton dress against her swollen belly. Each gust seemed to whisper her transgression. Shame clung to her like the dust of Dustwater Crossing, a town more aptly named than its founders likely intended. A place where hopes dried up and blew away, or were bartered for necessities. She kept her gaze pinned to the cracked earth, following her mother's relentless tug on her arm. No room for pride in her condition, Edna had snarled that morning, and Laya had learned long ago to obey. The livestock yard buzzed with the ugly energy of commerce. Cattle lowed, pigs squealed, and the air hung thick with the scent of manure and desperation. Ranchers, their faces weathered and hard, haggled over livestock. It was a common scene, a weekly ritual. Yet today, Laya felt every eye upon her, burning with curiosity and cruel judgment. Whispers followed them like shadows. That Whitmore girl, knocked up, getting sold off. Each word a stinging slap. Cullen Rayner stood apart from the chaos, a solitary mountain of a man leaning against the far fence. He was immense, dwarfing the weathered posts he leaned against. His face, shadowed by the brim of his hat, remained impassive. He hadn't moved a muscle since they'd entered the yard. Laya wondered if he even breathed. Edna, never one for pleasantries, marched directly toward him. You Cullen Rayner? She demanded, her voice brittle. The giant merely nodded, his gaze sweeping over Edna and landing on Laya, trapped like a rabbit in a snare. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Well, hell, Edna finally spat, her voice laced with bitterness. You're getting the better end of the deal. She eats like a hog, cries like a baby, but at least you're getting a cow out of it. She gestured behind them, and a ranch hand led forward a sleek black milk cow, its coat gleaming in the pale sunlight. Cullen's eyes flicked over the animal, a brief, assessing glance, before returning to Laya. She got a name? His voice was a low rumble, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath their feet. Laya, Edna snapped, as if the name itself was a curse. Laya Whitmore, 20 years old, stupid as a stone, and carrying a bastard. No need to dress it up. You want her? Take her. You don't? I'll dump her by the creek and let the buzzards sort it out. Laya's knees threatened to buckle. The shame, a constant companion, swelled into a suffocating wave. She wanted to speak, to beg, to plead, but fear had choked her voice into silence years ago. She can't cook, Edna continued, relentless in her cruelty. Barely cleans, cries at night like a child, and smells like potatoes half the time. But if you want a womb to warm your empty shack, she'll do. Cullen straightened, his shadow falling over Laya. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought he might finally speak to her, offer some glimpse of his thoughts. Instead, he reached past her, untied the cow's lead rope, and handed it to a nearby boy. She'll ride with me, he said, his voice flat. That's it. Edna blinked, momentarily stunned. You got your cow. The rest ain't none of my concern. A cruel smirk twisted her lips. Well, hell, at least now she's worth something. First time in her life. She spun on her heel and stalked away, leaving Laya standing alone in the dirt, exposed and vulnerable. The stares intensified, some curious, some disgusted, a few tinged with pity. No one offered a word of comfort, a gesture of support. She was a pariah, a discarded burden. "She is yours now, cowboy," someone called out, the words dripping with mockery. A chorus of laughter erupted. Cullen remained silent. He simply nodded toward his wagon, a silent command. With a heavy heart and trembling limbs, Leia began to move. Each step was an effort, her swollen belly a constant reminder of her shame. She cradled her stomach protectively, as if shielding the unborn child from the world's contempt. As she reached the wagon, she finally found her voice, a whisper barely audible above the wind. "I am not a thing." Cullen looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then he took the reins, his large hands firm and steady. "Only you ain't. Not to me." He climbed into the driver's seat, and they rode off into the dust, leaving Dustwater Crossing and her old life behind. Not a weapon to the world, but to herself. She wasn't alone anymore. The days softened. To the world, but to herself. She wasn't alone anymore. The days softened. There were still silences, but they no longer pressed on her like a weight. Instead, they wrapped around her like a quilt, worn and familiar. They became a space where things grew, quietly, trust maybe, or something close to it. They were the breath between words that mattered, a pause where neither of them had to explain why they stayed. Cullen never asked for help, but Leia noticed the way his hand slowed when she drew near, the way he handed her tools instead of doing it all himself. It wasn't just kindness, it was something gentler than that, a subtle invitation to belong. It started with herbs. "These are yarrow," he said one morning, crouched low beside the shed, where sunlight dappled the soil. His voice was low, even patient. "Boil them for fevers, dry the leaves for cuts." He broke off a sprig and handed it to her, sap already staining his fingers. She knelt slowly, letting the earth press into her knees. The leaves were rough, their smell bitter. She stripped the stems as he showed her, then bundled the stalks tight with twine and hung them high in the rafters of the shed, where they dry in the warmth. The work stained her hands, sap and dust. Little green flecks caught under her nails. But she didn't mind. It was the first time in months she'd felt useful, like she wasn't just waiting to give birth, like she was living now. Next came the sunflower seeds. "Split these," Cullen said the following day, pouring a mound of striped shells into a weathered wooden bowl. "Chickens like them small, helps them digest better." Sums. Leia carried the bowl to the porch, lowered herself into the chair he'd fixed with extra cushions, and got to work. Her fingers found a rhythm. Crack, flick, drop. The seeds clicked against the wood like tiny heartbeats. It was a small task, repetitive, almost mindless, but it grounded her, centered her. When she was done, Cullen reappeared with a small tin pail and offered it without a word. "Let's feed him." They walked to the chicken coop together. She waddled slow and wide-hipped. He matched her pace without comment. The chickens darted toward them in a flurry of yellow and white, pecking at her skirts, brushing against her ankles. Leia laughed high and sudden, like a bell that hadn't rung in years. The sound startled even her. Cullen turned slightly. "You got a gentle voice," he said, watching the bird settle near her feet. She blinked. "No one's ever said that to me." That evening, she found something waiting for her on the porch. A rocking chair, hand-carved, fresh cedar, its surface still warm from the Sunday. Its back curved gently, its legs strong and balanced. She ran her hand along the armrest. "You made this?" Cullen gave a one-shouldered shrug. "Figured you might want a place to sit while you watch the sky." She did just that as the sun fell behind the hills, painting the grass in amber. The wind picked up as dusk settled in, and before she could reach for her old shawl, Cullen stepped outside and handed her a folded bundle. A new one, knitted, rough in places with loops slightly uneven, but undeniably handmade. Soft green wool threaded with browns and pale creams like earth after rain. Leia clutched it to her chest. "You didn't have to." "I know," Cullen said. Then he turned and walked back inside. That night sleep refused to come, not because of pain, but because something inside her stirred. something she couldn't name, like warmth where frost had lived too long. Under the glow of the oil lamp, Laya sat at the table, shawl over her shoulders, needle in hand. She hadn't sewn since her mother sneered that she ruined every stitch she touched. But tonight, her fingers moved steady and sure. By morning, she had a gift, a square of cotton, plain, uneven, imperfect, but stitched with care. On the corner, one letter C, she folded it and placed it beside Cullen's bedding on the floor. No note, no explanation. At dawn, she rose to find him already outside splitting wood, and there, wrapped around his thick wrist, was the handkerchief, tied like it mattered. Leia didn't cry. She didn't sob or hide her face. She just stood there at the window, letting the tears fall freely, quietly, not out of sorrow, but because for the first time in her life, she had offered something of herself and it had been accepted. No ridicule, no mockery, just dignity, just care. She wasn't a burden anymore. She was becoming part of something real. The wind shifted. It came sharper that morning, carrying not the scent of dust or wildflowers, but trouble. Cullen noticed first a flicker on the horizon, a wagon drawn by two dark Mais, followed by a smaller rider on horseback. One wore a long black coat and a collar high at the neck, the town preacher. The other rode stiffly, a rifle slung behind his back, the sheriff. And between them, perched upright in the wagon seat, was a woman with gray stray hair coiled like a noose. Edna Whitmore. Leia saw the dust cloud from the porch. Her hands froze over the laundry basin. The fabric clung to her knuckles, soap suds dripping like sweat. "No," she whispered. Cullen stepped up beside her. Inside she obeyed, heart pounding, the swell of her belly suddenly feeling 10 times heavier. By the time the visitors dismounted, Cullen had already latched the barn doors, drawn the curtains, and pulled the long rifle from the top shelf of the wardrobe. He sat it down, not pointed, not raised, just ready. A knock came, sharp, impatient. Cullen opened the door halfway. He stood like a wall in the frame, voice low. "Morning." The sheriff spoke first. "Got a bit of a dispute." Edna stepped forward, skirts stiff and dustless despite the journey. Her eyes scanned the cabin's interior with disdain. "My daughter," she said like the words tasted bad. "I'm here to take her back." Cullen's brows didn't lift. "You traded her." Edna's lips curled. "I bartered temporary custody, not ownership. She's blood. She belongs home. She belongs where she's safe." The preacher cleared his throat. "The matter might require town arbitration. A woman in her condition living alone with an unmarried man?" Cullen's voice cut clean. "What does Leia want?" They all paused. Edna blinked. "She's not in a state to know what she wants." Cullen turned without another word and stepped aside. Inside, Leia had been listening. She pressed a hand to her chest, the other resting protectively on her belly. When he looked at her, she knew it was her choice, not his, not Edna's. Hers. She stepped forward slowly, every movement trembling, but deliberate. Her dress was plain, her hair loose in soft waves, her chin for once held high. "Mama," she said evenly. Edna's eyes narrowed. "Don't mama me, girl. You're coming home." Ella took a breath. "You sold me." Edna scoffed. "Don't be dramatic. I made a deal. You were eating us out of house and hope. You embarrassed the family. You left me no choice." "No choice." Ela's voice broke, but she didn't stop. "You could have helped me, protected me, asked me who the father was, but you didn't even want to know." Edna's gaze darted toward the preacher. "I did what I had to." "You sold me for a cow," Leia said. The words cracked across the yard like a whip. "I may be fat, I may be pregnant, but at least now," she said, voice rising. "Someone sees me as a person, not a burden, not a price." Cullen stood quietly behind her, unmoving. The preacher shifted uncomfortably. The sheriff looked down. But Edna? Her mouth opened and shut once. She took one step back, then another. Her face flamed red, not with shame, but with something colder. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "That child," Leia interrupted, eyes burning, "that child will grow up knowing they were wanted, not traded, not silenced, not broken. Edna turned, skirts snapping in the wind. She didn't say goodbye, didn't glance back, just climbed into the wagon and snapped the reins. Dust rose behind her wheels. The preacher gave a half-hearted nod and followed. The sheriff looked once at Cullen, then at Leah. He nodded once, respectful, and turned his horse without a word. When the sound of hooves faded into the hills, Leah leaned against the doorframe. Her breath shook. Cullen stepped beside her. "You did that," he said softly. She closed her eyes. "I finally said it," she whispered out loud. "You can say it again," he offered. "I'm not property," she murmured. "I'm not shame. I'm not a mistake." Cullen didn't answer. He just stood beside her, and for the first time Leah felt something shift deep inside her. Not fear, not grief, but power. The rain came hard that night. It beat against the windows like fists, wind howling through the eaves, lightning cracking over the hills. Inside the barn, warmth flickered from a lantern. The horses were quiet, sensing the shift. The air smelled of hay, wet wood, and coming change. Leah gripped the edge of the blanket beneath her. Her breath hitched. The pain had started just after dusk, low and steady. Now it came in waves, sharp and deep, ripping through her like thunder. "I think it's time," she whispered, tears already lining her lashes. Cullen was beside her in a breath. He had already brought water, already laid down clean cloth, already lit the fire higher in the hearth, and locked the doors from the inside. "You're safe," he murmured, kneeling beside her. "We'll do this together." She nodded, biting her lip through the next contraction. The storm outside raged, but in the barn there was only the sound of her breathing, the rustle of blankets, the steady scrape of Cullen's boots as he moved, bringing towels, holding her hand, soaking cloth to press against her forehead. "I can't," she whimpered once, when the pain flared sharp and cruel. "You can," he said softly, leaning closer. "You already have." His hand was huge but gentle against her back, anchoring her as she cried out, "Breathe, Leah. Just breathe through it." She screamed then, loud, raw, a sound from someplace deeper than bone. Sweat poured down her face. Her whole body shook. "You're doing it," Cullen whispered. "Almost there." The next push tore her, but after it, silence. Then a cry, wild and furious and alive. Leah sobbed before she even saw her. Cullen leaned back, cradling a tiny bundle slick with life. His face was unreadable, but his hands shook just slightly. He wrapped the baby gently, checked her, and then looked at Leah. "She's here," he said, voice. Then slowly, reverently, he placed the baby in Leah's arms. She looked down. Red skin, closed eyes, a mouth opened wide in protest, fingers clenched, tiny and perfect. Leah gasped, half laugh, half sob. "She's beautiful," she whispered. Cullen crouched beside her, one knee in the hay, watching mother and child as if afraid to break the moment. He didn't reach out. He just looked and said, "This little girl, she's proof." Leah blinked at him, still crying. "Proof?" she asked. "That you lived?" he said. "That you fought?" He reached for a towel and gently wiped her temple. "She's the reason they don't get to write your story anymore." Leah clutched her daughter closer. In her arms wasn't just a child. It was everything she had survived for. Outside, the storm broke into quiet drizzle. Inside, new life breathed for the first time, and Leah, torn, aching, exhausted, had never felt more whole. Rumors like prairie fire always find their way, but this time, they didn't carry shame. They carried curiosity, then wonder, then quietly respect. It started with whispers in the general store. The blacksmith's wife saw her first, Leah, in a plain dress that hugged her full figure, cheeks flushed with late summer sun, her newborn daughter cradled to her chest. Beside her stood Cullen Rear, a mountain of a man, flannel shirt rolled to the elbow, his gaze following Leah's every step like she was the only thing that ever made sense. No chains, no leash, just something stronger than either. Devotion. They bought flour, soap, and seed. They didn't rush. They didn't hide. Leah smiled at the woman behind the counter. Cullen nodded to the boys who used to spit when she passed. No one dared mock her now. Some townsfolk still whispered, "Is it true he took her for a cow? Is it true she gave birth in his barn?" But the way Cullen held the baby against his chest while Leia counted coins, gentle, protective, proud. It softened mouths and quieted laughter. They came to town more after that. Not often, just enough to be seen, to be real. And little by little, Leia Whitmore became a name people didn't say with curled lips. Spring came. The valley behind Cullen's land turned green with soft grasses and bluebells. Wildflowers grew without asking permission. So did love. They didn't plan a wedding. There was no preacher, no crowd, just the three of them, Leia, Cullen, and the baby girl with a cry like a hawk and a grip like hope. They stood under the wide branches of an old oak tree, barefoot in the grass, wind tugging at Leia's skirt. Cullen wore the same shirt he always did. Leia wore the shawl he'd knit her. He held her hands. She held his gaze. And with no one watching but the birds and sky, they whispered vows that didn't need witnesses. "I see you," he said simply. "I believe you," she answered, voice thick. He bent and kissed her, not hard, not fast, but with the kind of reverence a man gives to something once thought lost. Their baby girl cooed in Leia's arms. Afterward, they sat in the shade and ate honey biscuits. No music, no speeches, just the sound of wind and a woman's laughter, unapologetic, full and free. That night in their small, warm cabin, Leia held her daughter close, her hair damp from the bathwater Cullen had drawn. The fire crackled low. Outside, the stars blinked. Inside, peace bloomed like something earned. Leia kissed her daughter's tiny hand and whispered into the soft darkness, "You weren't born from shame, my love." She paused, voice trembling. "You were born from choice and love, always love." And in that cabin, beneath a roof built by calloused hands, Leia knew she didn't need to be smaller to be worthy. She didn't need to be quiet to be safe. She didn't need permission to be happy. She just needed to be home, and she finally was. If this story moved you, if it made you feel seen or reminded you that love can rise from even the hardest ground, go ahead and tap that like button and subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. We've got more tales of heart, grit, and the kind of romance that defies dust, time, and bloodlines. Because out here, love rides taller than legend, and no soul is ever too broken to be chosen. Stay wild, stay warm. We'll see you in the next story.